Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to kick off a new theme, back to the old ways of doing things. We're going to have a theme for this week called Going on a Journey. We're going to look at music that takes the listener on a journey. Not all of these are going to be epics, long 15 plus 20-minute tracks, but as I kind of expected with this theme, we're going to kick off the theme that way. We're going to be looking at Agalloch's Faustian Echoes today. And if I remember correctly, Agalloch is black metal? I probably should look this up, but honestly, I'd rather go in with the least amount of expectations as possible as to not sort of lean my analysis in any specific direction. Let's dive into this and see what Agalloch is bringing to the table today.
I, Johannes Faust, do call upon thee, Mephistopheles.
That's definitely a lot more rigid than I would expect from that, the 3/4. I know this feels loose to me, and this is the opposite of loose. Lots of bass presence though. Walking bass line that can be heard in black metal is quite unusual. Ooh. There was some crunching metal sound over here that was very prominent in the transition. I like that. I don't know what it was. It might have been part of the sample. Is it a sample? I haven't quite figured out what's going on with the vocals yet. That's definitely not a sample. And see, this kind of has that looseness in the 3 that I was expecting. Is that a sample though? I almost sound like a pig scrape, that little chirp that we had over here. There's some interesting clipping going on where the sound cuts out for a split second. And I keep thinking my headphones are cutting out. I'm not. really interesting to hear this heavy metal style melodic guitar here. That's sort of what I would expect more from the guitar work. That was a neat idea there, between the two guitars. So our left guitar keeps playing the atmosphere, the right guitar has more of this heavy metal. Yeah, that heavy metal punctuation at the end of the phrase. Really cool hearing them together. That rising and falling thing on the tremolo picking almost feels like a swirling madness to me for some reason. I think we had the ever slightest retardando there too. It's interesting, it almost sounds chiptune-ish. We're still slowing down, aren't we? Oh, there's a static drone there for a little bit that was really nicely chosen to put there. I'm not going to get it pulled up in time. I wanted to check the tempo there. I should just have my tempo checker available all the time whenever I'm reacting.
Now then, Faustus, what wouldst thou have Mephisto do? I charge thee, Mephisto, wait upon me while I live. To do
well, based off of memory, we were definitely under 40 beats per minute.
Be it to make the moon drop from out her sphere, or the ocean to overwhelm the world. Go bear these tidings to great Lucifer. Say
If that is a sample, it rhythmically lined up with the guitar so well.
so that he shall spare him 24 years, letting him live in all voluptuousness, having thee ever to attend on me, to give me whatsoever I shall ask. I will.
Interesting cymbal idea. It's not quite overwhelming. Almost got like a Midwest emo melody on this guitar over here. Interesting idea. Presenting an intro that alludes to one idea and then abruptly cutting it off for a completely different one. In fact, I think we even shifted from 4/4 to... Oh, we're still in 4. But we do have a 6 polyrhythm on the cymbals. And this nice 4 on everything else. They're definitely doing well with these really large atmospheres. Nice little accelerando on that snare roll leading into this faster section. Yeah, the fluidity of our guitar duads against just that really rigid snare work. There's a tension and a drive. Interestingly, as soon as I said drive, they backed it off. I mean, unless this is supposed to read as failure, it seemed like there was a... Oh, maybe not. I don't know, it's tough to get a read on what they're doing here. That black metal and Bryan, though, that always happens. I heard that coming. I like that little 16th note lick. Why is there random bits of sorrow in here? Loss, maybe? Grief? Oh, it's also optimistic, though. Achieving something through loss? Losing something through a process. ton of energy and intensity to wrap this track up.
So still I see a force, the reason governing life's flow, and not just its external show.
An acoustic variation on the same riff.
Some things can't be known, they are beyond your reach even when shown. Why should that be so? They lie outside the boundaries that words can address, and man can only grasp those thoughts which language can express. What? Do you mean that words are greater yet than man? Indeed they are. Then what of longing, or affection, pain and grief? I can't describe these, yet I know they're in my breast. What are they? Without substance, as mist is. In that case, man is only air as well.
You know, I was a little worried about that one. I guess we were about 10 or 11 minutes in, and I was like, I haven't really felt like I've been on a journey. It was exhausting around that time for sure. Black metal tends to have that effect on me. You make me listen to black metal for close to half an hour, I'm going to be pretty tired by the end. It's just, uh, black metal is an overwhelming sound for me still, after all these years of y'all trying to Stockholm me into enjoying it. I kid. But it's still something that can be very overwhelming for me. And so this was nice. We had nice contrast between a bunch of different sounds. But 11 minutes in, I didn't really felt like I'd gone anywhere. I was tired. Honestly, it felt like we had been listening to it for the full 20 already, around the halfway point. But being on a journey, wasn't sure. It's a subjective thing too, right? Some people are going to listen to this and feel like they're already on the journey by minute 3. It took me a bit longer though, and I'm glad I stuck with it, as if that's not my job up here. I didn't really have a choice, but I am glad I listened to the whole thing because the ending did feel like a journey. I think it was the final 3 sections that really clicked for me, and brought the journey perspective into focus. And I think that's what I mostly want to focus on, to use that word as a little segue there. The journey. Why the first 60% or so didn't feel like one as much as maybe the last 30% did. To me, particularly. Through this lens, we're going to dive into a lot of the composition, the structure, all sorts of stuff. Just like usual with these analyses, but it's all going to be in service of this larger idea. I think it'll keep everything cohesive and hopefully keep me on track. So let's start with the opening. Actually, let's start with atmosphere. That's what a lot of this track works within, whether it's the oppressive weight of the black metal or the moodiness of the slower ambient sections, or even the more melodically driven components that still have atmosphere at the forefront. The song, it has a lot of emotions. I'm curious to hit the lyrics. I don't know why I always say that. That's a weird phrase. I'm curious to see the lyrics. I'm curious about the lyrics. I'm ready to see the lyrics. I don't think I'm curious about them is a proper way to state that, but it's what I've said forever. It's one of my weird mannerisms, I guess. I'm eager to look at the lyrics though and see what specifically is going on, because I am fairly certain that half of the lyrics at least were spoken word, or at least half of the opening. I think we got less spoken word as the song went on. And the spoken word is a sample, I think. But the song explores a lot of emotions. There is crushing weight, there is intensity, there is pressure, time based pressure. And in one section, I remember bringing up prominently, the whole part felt like someone was being rushed. We have some more somber sections. We have introspective sections. By the end, there was a feeling of grief or loss combined with triumph or celebration, or maybe just the relief of finishing something. Maybe not a positive, you know, a positive idea of completion, like celebration or congratulation, but simply just a weight off your shoulders of having finally done this task. Like I said, that was mixed with the type of melancholy, a grief. And there's probably a lot of emotions I missed that might have been tucked away into some of the heavier ideas. A lot of the black metal sections, to me, are just aggressive. There's usually some dyad work going on, but it's all hidden beneath the intensity. And while my ears are getting a little bit better regarding black metal production, and I can hear the notes the guitars are playing, I still have a hard time hearing the notes, if that makes sense. Like I said, the intensity of it all, the speed and ferocity overpower the notes and intervals and reading the emotions that our chord progressions would be telling us in those sections. I've made progress being able to translate the sound of black metal into stuff my brain makes sense of, but it's still an ongoing process, and I'll get there eventually. But like I said, there's probably still some emotive stuff lost in translation as I'm listening to this. Something I might pick up on a second or third time, or something maybe someone in the comments will inform me of. A specific way that some of those heavier black metal sections might make them feel, aside from just the intensity or anxiety that the tempo and volume bring to the table. The song's atmosphere, we explore all these different emotions, right? But what does it all mean together? And honestly, on a first listen, it is way too dense for me to figure it out. At best, I can just see the journey I've gone on and see not even really an order of all of these emotions, just the fact that they were all felt within a single track. If you asked me to put them in order of how the song dealt with escalation and de escalation, I wouldn't be able to tell you. There's a lot going on in this track, 20 minutes worth of music, and my memory is good, but it's not that good. So, going on a journey is what this felt like. There's a lot of emotions, a lot of atmospheres, a lot of musical ground covered throughout this track, and I can't really make heads and tails of all of it, putting it into an overarching concept or idea or maybe even a narrative, but I can tell you that it felt like we did a lot in a little bit of amount of time, and honestly, it felt longer than 21 minutes to me. It felt large and lengthy. And so going on a journey is honestly the best description I have of my experience with this track on a first listen, based entirely on what I was feeling from moment to moment. There's a lot of diversity going on in this track that I wasn't expecting. Agalloch, atmospheric black metal. I'm pretty sure I had that ready for the beginning. Like I said, I wasn't 100% sure going in, but I didn't want to ruin anything or set any expectations. But I was pretty sure they were in the black metal camp, and I was not wrong. Very atmospheric track. But that's not the only inspiration I felt here. There's a lot of moodier sections, which could just be acoustic black metal if you wanted to go that route. I don't know if that's a real genre, but musically, it didn't feel that different from black metal. It was just not played with 16th notes. Well, and the guitars weren't distorted and overdriven. But the what was on paper is really not that different from what they would have played in the black metal sections. They just did it a little slower with acoustic instruments. And I like these moments. They provide a levity and a contrast while retaining the same emotions and vibes. They provide a moment of relief from the cacophony without necessarily a relief from the emotion. Any sort of weight or negativity or pressure that was in the music, the notes being played, is still present here. It just doesn't come accompanied with the crushing ferocity of the blast beats and double bass kicks and 16th note picking and even tremolo picking in some cases. And so, like I said, it is a relief, but it is not a complete relief. I have a moment to breathe, but the danger hasn't passed. The grief or pain or whatever the negativity is supposed to represent is still present. It just might not be as prominent as it was. As the saying goes, some days are better than others. And that's sort of what the slower, more atmospheric acoustic sections feel like. It still has some of that pain from the heavier sections. It's just not as heavy. It's a bearable pain. These are occasionally paired, and sometimes there's a metal version of this as well, with a sort of heavy metal melodic guitar writing. I really like this. To me it feels a bit out of place. As I've mentioned, black metal is a very atmospheric style of metal, and they transfer this into an acoustic atmospheric writing rather nicely. I don't typically expect melodic writing coming out of black metal bands, and so it's really interesting to hear this really strong, still atmospheric, but melody coming through. But what's interesting is, to me, I don't know if it's a component of pitches, of harmony, of rhythm. It seems there's a really strong heavy metal component to this. It almost feels like some of these guitar riffs, the more melodic ones that take lead during the quieter sections when there are no vocals, wouldn't feel that out of place in a traditional heavy metal band as a lead guitar line. Maybe even for some slower heavy metal bands as a solo. I never thought Agalloch had this kind of inspiration to their writing. I don't know when this came out, but to me there's a strong 90s element specifically coming out of the melody writing that feels comforting to me specifically. Now, this might be a very unique reaction to this, but I did find the melody writing, whenever the guitars got to take a lead melody in this fashion, to be like a home, a centering, um, almost a positivity. A lot of the music here is overwhelmingly negative. There are moments of brightness or relief, positivity, anything like that, but they're rare, I think, and usually they're also met with some sort of atmospheric negativity surrounding it. And usually that's the same case with these melodies, but they were a point for me to find a comfort within the song that didn't really exist anywhere else. And honestly, I'm not sure that's the intent of them, but that's what they felt like to me. They're sort of out of place. Again, I don't expect melodic writing in black metal to begin with, especially atmospheric black writing, but I especially don't expect this type of melodic writing. And I have a little bit of nostalgia for it, and it felt like something I could grasp onto and find a moment to relax within against the onslaught of the rest of the atmosphere. But that is pretty much the meat of our opening 60 minutes, 60 minutes, 60% of the track, opening 12 to 15 minutes or so. It's either black metal, atmospheric, and acoustic, or at least clean electric, and then melodic components. And we'd bounce around them, not necessarily in any pattern, it's just we'd have a harsh transition into a new section, and you don't really know what that section could be. Individually, there's a lot of unique components in here. I wouldn't say that many of these sections feel similar on the composition level. Of course, the roles are all similar in all of them, and the building of them, they're similar in foundation. But when you actually get into it, there's unique riffs in all of them, different types of atmosphere, rhythmic components. They're all fairly unique. This feels like an exceptionally long Rhapsody, and that helps with the whole journey idea, not returning to any repetition. But it ends up feeling a bit samey for me in these opening 60%, primarily because it's these three things. And when we go to a transition, you don't know what's next, but you know it's one of two things. And so you kind of gear up for that. And there's a point around the 9 minute mark, I think, where I began to predict when we would transition and how we would transition, utilizing body language and hand conducting. Um, when we would raise up and increase intensity, when we would relax and reduce intensity. It, I'm not going to say it became formulaic, but I began to see the patterns. The ending, the final 6 or 7 minutes, I think, is really where things got interesting for me. And that's not because anything changed. We still had these three styles, but they began to heighten them. And I think this is really important. The ending, I think, is supposed to be a finality. It is a culmination of the journey reaching its highest, most intense point. And how do you do that? When you've already had black metal sections that, as you looked at the volume meter over there, were capping it out consistently. It wasn't bouncing into it. We were just hardlining at the loudest volume they were going to have. How do you get bigger than that? How do you make a point that feels larger than maxing out your sound sphere? And honestly, you do it with strong composition. You're not going to increase any component of the sound itself. You can't be louder. You don't have more instrumentation to be wider. But what you do have access to is something exceptionally important for black metal: emotion. You're going to be leaning into this even more so. You're going to be elevating and even exaggerating the emotions that we've been exploring so far. And I think that's what makes the final, especially the final 3 minutes of the track, have such of an impact as it does, despite not really doing anything sonically different than what we've heard prior. It is a change up primarily in harmonic ideas and the melodic concept sitting on top of them to elevate the emotional register of the song. And so we finish out the track with blast beats, double bass kicks, tremolo picking, stuff we've heard in every other black metal section throughout this track. And yet it feels like it has more impact. It feels like we've reached a higher point than ever, despite looking at the waveforms and the volume levels being exactly where we've been. And it's because the music itself is heightened. And it's a really smart way to go about doing this. I don't know if a lot of metal bands think this way. I'm sure there are some, especially in the more progressive realms of music, where theory might be a bit more applicable to their composition process. But when it comes to black metal, rock, heavy metal, I don't really think that this is. Well, let me rephrase that. I don't want to assume anything about the composers. In the music, I don't hear this very often. The idea of knowing how to write music to have a minimal emotional impact and how to write music to engage those same emotions from a more maximal perspective. And Agalloch nails it. It is something I did not know was in their skill set, and they did such an exceptional job here. And that is why I said the ending clicks in a way that the rest doesn't, and why it feels more like a journey than I was expecting to be on around the halfway mark. Because for a long time, I thought the idea of this going on a journey is simply because it's long. And we do explore some different sounds, but like I said, they have three core ideas that they sort of dance around between. But no, we hit a point where I was like, dang, this wasn't just a time based journey. This didn't feel like a long thing because it was a long thing. This felt like a long experience because it's draining emotionally, because they reach some heights here at the end that punctuate the entire experience in a way that feels like I went on a trip. And I really appreciate that. Like I said, it is a nice surprise because it's something I didn't expect them to have in their repertoire. A couple of highlights that don't fit within this concept of going on a journey I do want to point out real quick before we hit the lyrics. Bass. Love the bass. It doesn't always do something interesting, but it has presence. I can always hear it, and it does have some really nice licks here and there. And I was really amazed right at the start to have more of a jazzy walking bass line of ascending and descending lines, which now that I think about it, ascension and descension is something that happens often in riffs in both the electric guitar and the bass guitar. I'm curious if those themes are going to show up in the lyrics at all. Reaching heights and failing. In fact, a lot of this song feels like reaching heights emotionally, volume wise, even width at times, and then bringing it down to more of a baseline level before bringing it back up. It's the contrast, it's the ebb and flow of the track. It's done in a lot of songs. Contrasting quiet and loud sections is pretty much a music staple for thousands of years now. Um, I'm not going to say that it's necessarily something to be read into here, but escalating and de escalating musical lines pop up here, as well as escalating and de escalating volume lines, and a rising feeling of emotion. There's just a lot of parallels in that composition element that I think it's worth exploring into regardless. Bass work. What was another thing that I thought was cool? Oh, the guitar riffs in here, even in the more black metal sections, were varied, and I found a bit of them to be quite cool, which I think is interesting. I'm not really a riff guy. I'm more of a song guy, but I enjoyed some of the riffs in here. I pointed a few of them out. It's getting too long away from the song for me to remember any in particular, but yeah, that's not usually a comment I have. Usually it's they were good for metal, They're rule of cool style riffs. They were cool. But no, actually some of them stood out here for me. And that might be it. I'm probably forgetting something. I apologize if it was like this key element. You're like, how could you not talk about this sound, like, I'm sorry. I forgot. I know there's some strings in here that were there for a second. I probably should talk about them, but I don't remember what they were doing. So, I'm gonna hit some lyrics now. It's been talking about this for like half an hour. Let's see what's going on with this story. So, that was a rabbit hole. And I'm sure anybody who knows what's going on with this track, they're like, yep, knew that was coming. um, so it's called Faustian Echoes, and it is about Faust. It's actually a culmination of a couple of things, if this is to be correct. There are some film samples from the 1994 film Faust, and the rest of the lyrics are from the English translation of Goethe's Faust poem slash play. I probably pronounced that name wrong. I should have looked it up real quick. The writer of the second part, not the one who did the 94 film. The poem was from, no year on this. First edition was 1808. So, a combination of a much older version of the story with a much newer version of the story. The story of Faust is different in several different iterations, but the general gist of it is that Faust wants all of the knowledge of the world and is willing to sell his soul for it. Makes a deal with Mephistopheles, who is acting as a stand in for Lucifer. Faust actually wanted to see the devil, and he showed up instead. And he's like, I'll be speaking to you. What do you need? And he's like, I want to know everything. And, I want your power at my hand as well. And so he gets it. He gets all this knowledge, and in different versions of the story, different things happen with the power he has. In one version, he uses it to seduce a woman so that they can be, so they can date. They don't get married. And in another version, he uses the power to control the world and create peace and control the politics of the globe. But the idea is he has all this power at his hands, at his fingertips. And at the very end of the song, which is based on the 1808 play, uh, he looks at Mephistopheles. He's like, yo, there's still some stuff I don't know. He's like, the lyrics and the poem, I suppose, goes, so still I seek the force, the reason governing life's flow, and not just its external show. I don't want to just know about the science. I want to know about how the world works, the stuff we can't explain through science. And Mephistopheles says, you can't know those. They're beyond your reach. You're still mortal. You're still of this plane, you know? Says they lie outside the boundaries that words can address, and man can only grasp those thoughts which language can express. And Faust says, do you mean that words are greater yet than man? Mephistopheles says, yeah, indeed they are. Faust replies, then what of longing, affection, pain, and grief? I can't describe these, yet I know they are in my breast. What are they? Mephistopheles says, without substance, as mist is. Those feelings are things that you cannot see, you cannot touch. They are not representative through your five senses. Once again, you as a mortal cannot understand this stuff. And Faust finishes off this track with, in that case, man is only air as well. The idea that through all this power, he sold his soul for all of this knowledge, and still he had desires that could not be fulfilled and ultimately lost his soul to the devil because of it, though in some iterations his soul is still saved and he goes to heaven regardless. But that's outside the scope of the song. So I think it's really interesting that we have this journey of Faust represented musically. The discontent at the beginning, the rise of power. Well, I guess also the summoning of Mephistopheles, the conversation there, telling him what he wants, um, gaining this power, utilizing this power, abusing this power, and finally realizing that it's still not enough. And I think that was at the end when I had mentioned that there was joy, but also loss. And there's a bittersweet element to that. And I couldn't quite figure out what that meant. And I think this is it, that he realizes he sacrificed his soul, that uh, he lost a pretty important part of his, especially considering the eternity of afterlife in this narrative. And he gave it up for something that still didn't satisfy him. He was still discontent with how things turned out. Um, yeah, I'd say it goes together well. I'm still not a huge fan of uh, black metal. In my mind, if I were to write a story based off of this, I would probably go a very, very different route. But that's not to say that I think this was bad in any way. I don't think it fully represents the full spectrum of emotions going on here, but it does a fantastic job of latching onto the key emotions in a bit more of a blunt sense, except for the ending, which really does a good job of exemplifying a bit more of the nuance. And taking the listener on the same emotive journey that Faust went on um, while telling this story. I think it works well. This is a long video. Those are my thoughts on Agalloch's Faustian Echoes. Faustian Echoes? Because his name's Faust. Why have I been saying Faustian this whole time? Anyways, let me know your thoughts. Down in the comment section, put your opinions, your perspectives, what you thought of this track, if you enjoyed it, if you have a completely different read on it, let me know. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. You can find my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three. We have a special selection coming up next. I don't know much about it. It's just called Curtain Wall. That's the band. And the song is called Siege Obsessed. Not with an O like obsessed, but with a U like obsessed. I don't know. It looks interesting based on the album art. You might want to check that out. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC, 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.